inspiring connection, restore, renew, reconnect, live, laugh, in love, connections, dream, getaway experiences. Brave Heart Workshops. Unique Getaways live with Jill Reynolds.
The Connection Show. Restore, renew, and reconnect in community. Sponsored by Brave Heart Workshops live with Jill Reynolds. And my guest today is, I'm hoping I'm going to say this right, is Cheri Doyen. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Cheri Doyen. Welcome, Cherie. So great to have you with us on the show.
Oh, I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And what I'd love to do is read a little bit to you, audience, about who Cherie is so that you know what her background is. She's endured and survived physical, mental, and sexual abuse as a young girl. She made it her life's mission to help other survivors of childhood trauma untangle their stories and move into a life where they can thrive. Cherie is an advocate, a healer, an author, and the founder of, and I'll probably say this wrong, Quantum TherapeutixTM.
Perfect. Yeah.
A new approach to confronting PTSD and the lingering effects of trauma. Cherie has proven results from using quantum therapeutic to aid and support women in domestic violence shelters and has worked closely with the victims of human trafficking. She stood by women in court fighting for their children and sat with them as they testified before Homeland Security. Cherie's in the process of launching the Trauma to Enlightenment Academy, Activation, Refinement and Mastery, featuring the quantum therapeutic trademark methodology at its core. Her personal thirst for knowledge has led her to study meditation and mind science through the Chakra Center for Well-Being. Her studies include energy medicine, theta healing, and I'm going to say it wrong.
Yeah,
the Silva method, all supporting her innate, intuitive, and quantum abilities. So I'll let her explain stuff to you because I probably can't say it as well. So what a bio, and thank you so much for being so transparent on your journey.
Yeah, thank you. I feel that untangling PTSD is why I'm here. I find that, that thought of why some people don't just get over it, why, right? And through all my studies, I was like, I could mouth everything that has been being said to me, but my life is not changing. I'm still being triggered, right? I'm still having emotional spills. I do not feel emotionally sound, and my body is very ill. And that just sent me around the world and back, right? To try to find the action, because I felt like through my journey, I had some beautiful healers trying to help me, right? But it was always a fragmented sort of healing as well. Here I am fragmented, and then there's somebody just looking at one fragment, right? And it became a thirst to me, like I need to find somebody that can see the whole picture of me, all dimensions at the same time, because that's the only way I'm going to get put back together.
That's lovely.
Yeah, and so quantum therapeutics was born on the back of that, just like, we really look from the physical, behavioral, emotional, mental, spiritual. That's 5 levels of existence, right? And you can't just heal from the spiritual. You can't just, because we have, this game we're playing on this planet is action and choice. Right? When we just throw it up in the air and go, okay, I'm just going to let it unravel, that takes a long time. Right? Quantum is a very active process that it's interesting because the actions, the quantum actions of a flashback is the action of us ejecting from our bodies and flashing through time in an instant. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
When somebody gets triggered, what if that could be induced and we could take action in that jump? That's quantum therapeutics. Like, we actually go back and, you know, in my years of study, I really got fascinated with the astral body as well, right? And the astral body is the energetic version of our physical body. So if we're actually being fragmented, what's fragmenting? Our astral body. So does it mean that in each one of these places of stagnation, I call them like cysts on our timeline, that we actually have molecules of this astral body trapped? So through the process of quantum, we actually go back in and create a vortex to integrate those molecules back into the whole of that astral body, which is very different than like the idea of integration. Oh, I'm integrating that experience. Like, it's very literal. Like, we're integrating the astral body back together, or fusing it, right? And very often people come out of an experience and their reaction is like, oh, I feel more whole, or I feel fuller, or I feel bigger, or I feel taller. Right? Because when we're triggered, we're operating from these very young aspects of ourselves. So what a job is that when you think about it? Okay, I'm triggered and I've got a 6-year-old that's trying to sit in the bank and make a bank deal. How overwhelming is that? So we wonder why we hit these buckets of emotion, right? Because most often, I've been working recently with a woman who is on disability, or has been. She's ready to go back to work now, from actual alternate personalities, right? So that's been an interesting space to operate and actually see these young aspects of ourselves come up to fight. So they're always coming up to fight or save us, right, when we're being triggered. And she doesn't have that anymore. It doesn't have that anymore. And she's like, she said to me the other day, I'm learning how to be a grown-up now. Right? So that's my passion. It took me around the world and back, because I find that people that are tangled up in PTSD are extraordinarily brilliant people, because it's a quantum action. They couldn't have done it if they weren't brilliant. Not every person that has trauma gets PTSD. We have to think about that. What makes that person different? Usually they're highly sensitive to start with, right? And then you crack them open. And we know for adults, like, when we're cracked open from an experience, like be it a car accident or whatever, right? Something big like that, that we allow that person probably, you know, when they talk about having an out-of-body experience, or that they could watch that from above, or gosh, I feel like I could see, you know, people operating on me. We give them that. We don't acknowledge that in these little bitty kids, right? That maybe we're blown open like that at 3 or 4, right? And
well, that's interesting. Yeah, I myself have done a lot of work with PTSD. I was living in Chicago, and I was involved with the longest standing Dan Allender Healing the Wounded Heart group for sexual survivors. He's got a book out called The Wounded Heart that he wrote years ago, and then Healing the Wounded Heart. And one of the girls in our group has her doctorate degree in trauma of the brain. She went to Northwestern and got her doctorate researching the brain with trauma, and she wrote one of the chapters in Healing the Wounded Heart, and she was my leader. And one of the things I learned in that group, which was really impactful and really life-changing for me, was how imperative it is to learn how to get out of the helicopter and land the plane. And Dan talks about that in his trauma courses that he teaches, about how when we have trauma in our life, being a large T or a small t, because even small t's affect us greatly, that how important it is to get out of the helicopter. And what he explains is it's imperative to write that trauma down descriptively in about 1,000 words. And so when I had my date rape at 14, I had shared it many times in therapy, many times, but never felt the impact. And so I finally, when I was in that group, made a decision to get out of the helicopter and write it. And I just put it on my website, Braveheart Workshops, my blog post, my 1,000 words. And I had the courage to do it. And I read that in my group, and it was so much more impactful and healing by seeing it and saying it out loud and experiencing it. And then, because I've done a lot of work with trauma therapy, I then was able to take that same written piece and utilize somatic therapy with internal family systems, and have someone in the room speak the words of my rapist, and then somatically be able to get that rape out of my body, to get it out of the body through embodiment somatic work. And it was so
I understand what you're
powerful.
doing. I do understand what you're doing, and I agree with you. But a person who grew up in childhood trauma has trauma every day.
Mm-hmm.
And they got ejected from their body, and what if you could pop through, I worked with a woman today, and we probably went through at least 6 to 8 trauma points, and we were never more than 7, 8, 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's fast. Right? It's like, let's pinpoint it. Let's find those patterns of words. Let's find the patterns of behavior. Let's find that exact moment in time when you embodied a thought, right? And that moment was frozen, right? So we can go right in, rewrite that program, pull those molecules back out, and bring them back into today. Right? Because what happens when a child is traumatized over and over again, right? Because I know that people that lived with me, like, because I wrote a book, right? My story is out there, and I very freely talk about it. But, the man that lived with me through all those years, right? His idea was, after reading the book, was like, I understood, but I didn't understand the level that it was a constant everyday thing. Mm-hmm. Right? I had 3 sexual abusers. I almost died a couple times. Like, it was just like tomorrow was not an expectation in our house. We lived moment to moment. And what I can say is, after all of my years in therapy, I was in therapy for 30 years. I think one thing with a child who hits those spaces over and over again, I had a therapist, my final psychiatrist says to me, he says, Cherie, my final visit, he says, Cherie, I don't know how to help you any further. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I can tell you what I see. What I see is you're not in there. And he waves at my body, and I'm like, what do you mean? He said, you're not in there, and I don't know how to help you any further. And I said, well, if I'm not in there, where am I? And he said, I don't know. That question took me around the world and back, because I felt empty, alone, isolated, separate, lost, right? My body felt vacant, like a house that hadn't been lived in, right? And, I started looking at the standard world's version of disassociation. There's not much. It's an idea, right? It's an idea. But what if it were literal? What if you really have separated from your body? Right? And when I started studying, because once I got through Chopra, I was kind of like, but I'm still being triggered. Like, so I started really following my innate, like, psychic abilities, and I ended up in this astral travel class, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, my perspective on life isn't changing with her conversation on guiding us out of our body. But when she brought us home, my life started changing. I don't know that I could remember looking out of my eyeballs, right? So many of my clients talk about watching themselves live. They talk about, constantly trying to ground, right? Aligning your astral body with your physical body is an action. It's not like, oh, I need to ground, right? It is a system for us, right? It's our life force, right? So when she brought us in, and here's her next words. She said, "Now I really want to urge you to always astral travel in pairs, because we can get out there in times very different, and we can be out there for a long, long time." Right? And that's one of the first things I teach my clients, is how to be in their bodies and what that feels like and what feels different, right? In working with this woman today, we did a integration, and I said, you need to go look in the mirror right now, because you look completely different. She looked completely different, right? And what if it could really be that fast? What if in like a few weeks, like, that part could be over and you could focus on living and learning how to? Because if you've had PTSD and all this upside down backwards programming, we got to spend some energy on how to live differently, right? And in the Trauma to Enlightenment Academy, that's the thing. That second phase is like, because my people will get to this space where they're very clean, and they'll even say that. They're like, I feel like a blank canvas, which is kind of cool, because I could paint anything, but I don't know how to paint, right? Which is beautiful. I call that the baby Buddha stage, right? And it's just learning how to maneuver life from a forward growth-oriented way versus that circle backwards that people with PTSD tend to do, right? We're all, that word always, and that's always, and we circle back, right? So there's a space where we have to learn how to see what's right in our environment versus what's wrong all the time, which that kept us alive for a lot of years, being able to see what's wrong and anticipate, right? But
well, I've done similar stuff with internal family systems work with Dick Schwartz, where I've been able to personally myself experience quite a bit of similar stuff that what you're saying. Where for me, I too lived in my whole life was trauma from the minute conception took place. It was trauma. And I remember being in treatment for my eating disorders and being in a body image group. And the girls in the group were talking about how they had horrific body image. And I remember saying to the body image therapist, I just can't relate to all these people who have all this problem about body image. I don't feel like I'm struggling with body image issues. She just looked at me and says, Jill, that's because you don't even know you have a body. You don't even know your body is even there. And so that was kind of profound for me. But what I found for myself, because I too, like you, Cherie, had been in years and years of therapy and tried every modality you could ever imagine. And the only thing for personal gain for myself that really helped is when I was introduced to internal family systems, where I was able to close my eyes and go within and talk to the parts that needed attention and really be compassionate, curious, creative, and connected with them. And so, for me to be able to go inside and talk to my hate part or talk to my abandonment part or my despised part or my despaired part and really actually ask them why they came in to protect me and what their purpose was and give them a voice. At that point then, because I love the beach, I lined up on the beach all these wonderful little, I did my social distancing with my IFS. I lined them up about 10 feet apart and gave them all little sand pails and suntan lotion and a sun umbrella and a book and a beach towel. And so I just could go inside at any time.
So
and just
have you ever had deja vu? This is what's different, because I've done that too, and a lot of my clients have done that, you know, that sort of work, and I'm not diminishing it in any way. What I'm saying is this is something brand new, and I'm trying to get it visible for PTSD because it is rapid and it sticks, right?
And so how does that work? So let me just ask this for the audience, so the audience that's listening. So someone, and again, just so that I'm mindful of our audience, because I want them to know about this. So how does this work with somebody, okay, who has a strong Christian belief of God as the healer, and they're not into Buddhism, they're not into, say, like, let's say past lives or anything like that, or reincarnation. So how does that work?
This isn't about any of that, because you're already having flashbacks.
Okay.
You're inducing an action that you're already doing.
Okay.
Right? And we're inducing it. And we're saying, all right, let's find that moment in time that you got sideswiped and let's write it. Right? What is I find very interesting is most people, a lot of my clients who have multiple cysts on their timeline, right, which is a pocket of hatred or a pocket of disgust or a pocket of, you know, whatever, right? The brilliance of that child to be able to encapsulate that so that they can get up and have breakfast in the morning is ingenious.
Okay. So, for example, let me ask you this, so I could understand this a little bit better, and the audience that has it. So, again, when I was in treatment back in 2011, I think it was, one day, and I just did this on my own. It was not an assignment at all, but I felt for my own healing I needed to do it. I took out a huge piece of paper, pulled out a roll of paper, white paper, and one weekend, because a lot of times the treatment team isn't doing much therapy on the weekend. And so I just spent one day, and because I'm one of those resilient healers. There's many people that aren't resilient. I'm one of those. I want to learn and I want to grow. So I took out this big piece of paper and on a timeline wrote down the date of my birth, and then I put down each year in increments all the way across. So, you know, boom, 50 years of life putting across with different years. And I remember as I did it, in the columns, I wanted to write down all my trauma. This happened year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Well, when I got to 7 years old, there were like 10 traumas, huge traumas, in that year. And at the end of the paper, I said, and this is the year I died. It was like, this was my death. And I could really like target in and look at it. And some of the treatment teams saw me doing it and says, why are you doing this? It's going to like induce all this extra trauma. And I said, because I want to clear it. So it's kind of like, it sounds similar. I wanted a clearing. I wanted to boom, 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 boom. I wanted to see, this is the year that someone said they were going to murder me.
And you know, there's often times where I'm sitting with someone and we trace back and they're like, wow, I would have never picked this moment to be the anchoring moment of my suffering.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes it isn't a huge trauma. Maybe it's after the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's after maybe it's a month or 6 weeks after the trauma where this young girl just gives up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It may be that. And so when we go in, there's not a predestined, we follow backwards, you know. This has nothing to do with, although I do believe that the Great White Wizard, right? So I don't have any, but this isn't about, you know, I don't find healing to be Christian or to be Buddhist or to be, I feel that there were actions that caused us to break and there are actions that put us back together. And I don't claim to heal anyone. What I do is show you how to use what you're already doing to create wholeness.
Okay.
Right? And most often, you know, through those years of not being heard and being smacked and hit and love and, you know, all that being so confused, you know, we're turning off our intuition increment by increment. We're turning on that and off that inner guidance, because what has it done for us? We are still in jeopardy, right? So often as we're pulling these pieces back together, literally, right, that connection to that becomes back to what it was when we were children, right? Before, you know, hit after hit, before praying for hours to be saved, before, you know, those things where we haven't been heard, we haven't been, I know for myself, I don't know how many times I went to my mother with a plan to escape, right? So pretty soon, are you going to be thinking about escaping, or are you going to be residing yourself to this being your life for this child, right? So brilliance gets turned down on one level, right? And on another level, a part of our being is so ramped up, that's hypervigilance, of being able to read what's coming energetically, right? So that we can, how many times do we actually save ourselves by getting out of the house before the rage starts? Or, you know, I think when we come into wholeness, we can look at these children and go, wow, you saved me.
So how does some of this work with you for the audience to understand it that might be interested?
Okay, ask me the question again.
So when you do the work, when you're doing work with the clients that you're working, how does some of the work transpire? Are you speaking to them? Are they what?
Yeah, we're here. Like say, you know, most often I work online, and somebody comes in, I'm like, all right, what are you bumping up against in your life right now? Right? What do you want to see change? And we pick 3 to start, right? And we trace them back, right? Trace back the block that is stopping us from moving forward. Because that kid's been making sideways choices. Like, you know, some people are operating like a tree and some are operating like a bush.
So,
right?
So like for today, many people, and it's apparent, many people are filled with really big bouts of loneliness with social distancing. Yeah. So if they walk in and say, my big right now is loneliness, I just feel so lonely. So take it from...
I'd say close your eyes. Mm-hmm. And how old do you feel right now?
Okay.
And they say, oh, I feel like I'm 3. I'm like, okay, where is that 3 level? Oh, she's in the crib by herself. Mm-hmm. Where's mom? I don't know. I said, all right, let's go there. The distinction is we don't go as a child, we go as a grown-up. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're triggering that space of being able to actually interact with the information there. So say the grown-up comes in, I'm like, can you see your feet? Are they on the ground? Can you reach down and touch the grass? Right? Describe the house to me, because I want to make sure I'm in the same space they are. Right? We go inside, step inside. What do you see? Right? Because we're operating from a clear perspective. Now, one thing is often is the grown-up has spread a whole lot of icing and excuses and around the initial impactment of those incidents, really most often, right? So there's a conflict between what the adult thinks and what the child thinks, really, most often, right? And so we can go in, find out really what's going on. We can do memory recovery in this space very readily, right? Where was mom? Was she really left alone, right? What was going on? Why was she feeling so alone? Were they fighting? Did they put her in there to remove her? Or did they actually forget her in there? right? And we go into the little girl,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And we're like, all right. So then I like to get them out of the house as quickly as possible. Get them outside into nature somewhere where they feel safe to share, right? And it's like, all right, what does this child need right now? And what do you need to know from her? And in that sharing and blending of information, when both feel at peace, when both feel like there's nothing left to say, we create a vortex that blends them back together. And after them going into the vortex, they drop back down to the earth, and it's like the grown-up one is the only one left.
Okay. So that
And
gives
so
you a
when
little...
we bring them back to back to this time and space, you know, the quality that was trapped there is brought forward. So I work a lot with leaders who are afraid to lead, right? I work a lot with healers that are feeling sacrifice around healing. I work a lot with therapists. I have many therapists in my program, right? Because I think that we know that 30 years is too long to be in therapy, right? We know now that functioning is not living, and we know now that we're spreading it to our children. Right? It's like a virus, and we have to take responsibility for that, right? We have to take responsibility for how we are today affecting people, right? Because even being a victim, we're affecting people, right? Being ill, we're affecting people, right? And, you know, my body was physically dying. I was told, like, I weighed 98 pounds. My blood pressure, like, I was in the hospital because it was so low that, I mean, nobody understood why I was even still alive, right? And the end result was the doctor saying, I can't find a thing the matter with you. But what I will say is stress kills people every day, and your body is dying, right? Your body is dying. And I'm like, I don't have any life force left in it. It's all dispersed. Right? It didn't feel like there was enough of me left here to fuel my body, right? And I've done a lot of work with human trafficking, sexual trauma, schizophrenia, DID, multiple different, bipolar, and I don't believe in illness. I believe in fragmentation. And
I got to lighten it up for you. When I was in treatment, I had a psychiatrist, and I said to him one day, I said, Dr. Q, how would you diagnose my trauma with, you know, my bipolar and my borderline? And he sat there with his arms crossed. He sat back like this, and the sweetest man you'd ever want to meet. And he just looked and said, Jill, I think I would say you have unique personality disorder. There's no one like you. He goes, you're unique. And it was so healing. It was
that is the brilliance that I find.
Yeah.
Whether I'm in a shelter working, whether I'm down with the human trafficking, whether I'm down with people, homeless people off the street, they're brilliant.
Yeah. Right?
But what we need to understand is brilliance in our world of normal is crazy, right? Because this is average or below, right? There's no genius or superhero-ness here, right? I see people with PTSD as superheroes. If you look on TV right now, everybody that's got all these superpowers, right, have PTSD, right? They've all had these huge jars that open something in them, like that mom who could lift a car off of her child. So what if we were shown our capabilities and instead we're like this, right? What if we can turn that brilliance I like to think about, like, you know, a super intelligent person working a factory job. What's his brain going to do? It's going to eat him alive while he's standing there turning that one screw day in and day out. Mm-hmm. What if we're super brilliant and we're trapped in this mundane space and trying to go backwards and be normal? Einstein wasn't normal. Michelangelo wasn't normal.
Well, I like having unique personality disorder because, you know, my saying too is I'm a former, because I went for years, a former 12-stepper, and one of my favorite AA slogans is look for the similarities instead of the differences. We go through life all the time wanting to find why we're so different. Like when I've done a lot of my own personal work, sometimes I end up going last in a group therapy setting because I very easily can go right into that transformational. Like if you and I did the work together, I'd be like boom, 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 boom.
I can tell that.
You know, I just press it. You know, I'm just like boom, boom, boom. And so sometimes it scares others who haven't done that kind of deep work like me, and then they say, well, my life wasn't as traumatic as yours, so I don't think I have as much stuff to work on. And I'm like, why are you trying to be different in saying your trauma wasn't as big? Because your trauma is your trauma, and my trauma is my trauma.
And that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because there's a big part of it that is trying to be sane.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I'm like, I know my life was complete. I had to one time, Cherie, say to one therapist I had who I absolutely loved, I just said, you know, Carol, you see trauma patients all day long. And she was seeing myself and she was seeing my sister individually. And I said, you know our story. And I always needed benchmarks. I think trauma survivors sometimes need benchmarks.
Because we definitely need to measure.
Yeah, we got to know, like, how bad was this? Because we don't know. And so I said to her one day, of all the clients you have, where am I on the spectrum from 1 being mild trauma to 10 being worse? And she said, I have never counseled anyone that lived in the trauma you guys did. I don't have any idea how you 3 kids are alive. I have 0 idea how you survived. She goes, it was so insane. I had one story I'll share real quick. My brother, who was the youngest, he was in 5th grade, and he's 3 years younger than me. He had gone to school one day and walked home. We lived about 6 blocks from the elementary school. He walked home to have lunch. He comes into the house, and the back door, the glass was broken. And it was broken on the house. So he sat down, and the whole house was overthrown. Like, everything was overthrown. TV's gone. I mean, it was like totally in disarray. He sat down and had a sandwich in the midst of the insanity. Got up, walked back to school, and just mentioned to his teacher that the house was all like this. And she called my mom, who then went home and called the police. And we had been robbed, burglarized. They had come in with a big 20-foot truck, broke in the back door, and just like took stuff out of her house. And the essence of the story is, because our trauma was so insane, he just thought it looked normal. He just thought, oh, Tom must have come home, my stepfather, and took in all the stuff and threw it around the house and broke down he just thought
I lived very similarly,
yeah.
right?
So we didn't know what normal looked like, is the point I'm getting at. And so that just seemed normal to us. So for us growing up, we just thought that was typical. And it's so funny because over the years, when I dated different people, I don't remember ever telling a soul that I lived in a traumatic family, because I really didn't know I did. I had no idea I did. I thought, isn't this the way everybody lives? I had no clue that it wasn't normal.
I pretty much, at the pregnancy of my first child, there was a lot I needed to know. There was a lot I didn't remember. I had complete amnesia. And, you know, like I said, I had 3 abusers, one of them being my dad from very early, and sexual abusers. I mean, and my dad was very violent. He was released from the Army on a Section 8, you know, mental instability. And he was a raging alcoholic. And he had PTSD. So he would rage out. And he almost killed me once when I was 6 months old and once when I was 9. And we lived with guns. We lived with, you know, gather up all the guns and get them out of the house. Dad's coming. You know, we lived like that. And that was every day. It wasn't like, oh, well, you know, we had a couple big events. We had that every day. And I think that, you know, when we realize how many children are living like that, you know, and the medical world told my husband that I wasn't ever going to get that. Head-Stockel syndrome I had, like I, you know, they were like, it was just too much. She's never going to get better. Like, they tried to get me to go on disability and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, there just came a point where I was like, I haven't died yet. I must be here for a reason. You know, I've had numerous opportunities to leave and I'm still here. And I need to find the answer to this. And I don't want people to spend years fixing themselves anymore. Our world needs us awake and personally responsible and being in integrity. And we can't be when we have PTSD. We can't be in integrity, right? Like, we're bouncing around time where, like, you know, no one knows how you're going to respond, and even yourself. So, you know, that's my passion. And
well, that's an amazing story. What I'd like to transition with for the audience is to ask you now for yourself, what has connection looked like for you during the social distancing? Has it looked any different? How do you see it, even with clients, with the social distancing?
You know, at first it felt, because I had a lot of in-person work, and it felt different, but at the same time, I had the capability of seeing more people, right? And, you know, I'll tell you what, the connection of healers across the planet right now is very powerful. And I know through my years, like, it was like, you know, collaboration was difficult. Like, everybody wanted to be like, we were this isolated people. And I feel like people now are really wanting to join hands and say, what can we do together to create change on this planet? Because we need it. Our planet is dying. You know, humans are living like the dinosaurs of the day, right? We're just devouring as we move forward. And we have to step back and go, wait, right? What can we do different within ourselves to create a different sort of footprint on this planet and within our families? And yeah, that's my passion.
So what would you say your dream is for the remainder of the year? 6 months left for the rest of this year. What do you have dreams or goals for this year?
Well, I'm really growing the Trauma to Enlightenment Academy, but my biggest dream is to have a quantum therapeutics facility or home where we could bring in the sexual abuse survivors and dive in a safe environment and get them back on their feet and have an integration back into society. Like I said, I've done a lot of work with the human trafficking people here, and it's been difficult because they're so afraid that without that underlying safety of physicalness, right, of knowing that their abusers can't find them, blah, 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 you know, it's been a difficult push forward, right? You know, if your environment is that you're homeless, it's difficult to think about the deep inner work, right? So that's my passion. I really am trying to gather money for that. We have some strong statistics around what quantum therapeutics is capable of in that space. And yeah, so we're
And,
calling in the box to do that.
and what would a getaway experience look like for you?
If I were hosting it or for myself?
Either or both.
If I were hosting it, I would love to be in where each person had an individual space to go to after their deep work, right? So that they could have that alone time. I'd love to be buried in nature, because I find nature to be so healing just in and of itself. And my purpose for each person would be massive, massive change.
Okay, awesome. And if someone told you that you had to eliminate all your apps on your phone but two, what are your must-have apps?
Well, probably my text messaging. I'm not much of an app person. Probably Boxer. Boxer I use with my clients a lot.
And what is that?
Boxer is a walkie-talkie app because, you know, I feel like people that are really coming out of crisis, and I work with a lot of crisis people, they need support in between on how to maneuver what is their current circumstance in a different way. And so they have me walkie-talkie. Right? And so in between, like through the whole, like, you know, and sometimes it helps just to say something out loud too and listen to it. Right? And they'll go, oh, you don't have to respond to that. Right? Because hearing it, right? But it is a way for us to stay connected 24/7.
Cool. Awesome.
Right? I walk with people. Like I truly do. I am so passionate about somebody getting from A to B and not spending a lifetime doing that.
Awesome. And what's one fun fact about you? Because you know as well as I know, we got to mirror some joy and laughter and fun in between all this heaviness. So there's got to be a fun.
Yeah, one fun fact about me is I love nature and I love animals. And when I'm out in nature and I'm right, the animals play with me. Right? You know, I had a red-tailed hawk land on the ground on the path in front of me and just dance with me for 30 minutes, right? When my dog's running around, I've seen a couple bobcats recently. So, like, I love to go out to the river. I do that almost every day. And allow nature to talk to me.
That's great. Well, I've got fun. Since you shared that, I was a single, never married mom, so when I was raising my son, and he was just little, we lived in a second-story apartment, and my balcony overlooked a tree similar to my palm tree in the back, but it was in Chicago. So there was a tree there. So in the spring, I would sit out on the patio with him, and he was just starting to mumble. He wasn't even talking yet. And as I have a bird whistle. It goes. So I would sit there and whistle, and the birds would fly and land, and so I'd say, Birdie, Birdie. So his first word out of his mouth wasn't mommy, it was Birdie, Birdie.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's my one, and there's something about birds with me. And so when I went to Aruba with my husband in November, my holistic naturopath doctor told me, when you get to Aruba, make sure you go outside every morning right before the sun comes up and sit down and ground your feet in the sand and stare at the sun, and you'll get enough vitamin D for your whole day. Just stare at and then when the sun sets, do the same thing.
Light therapy is amazing. Yeah.
So I did this every single morning, and I am not a morning person. You can't get me up for the life of me, but my body literally was so energized. It would leap out of bed at 6:10 every morning, and I'd go outside and I'd sit in that sand and watch the sunset or sunrise. And I have my Bose speaker. And one thing I had done when I was in treatment, it was so cool. I felt led to write down like about 50 positive words and then go on the computer and write what their opposites were. So like peace, and the opposite might be anxiety, or whatever the good, the positive versus the opposite. So I recorded that on my cell phone with my Bose speaker, and then I recorded this amazing what are your intentions for the day meditation with chair yoga. And so every morning I'd go out and ground myself, and then I would put on this breathe in peace, exhale anxiety, breathe in love, exhale hate, really gentle thing. And then I would put on my chair yoga. So one day I'm sitting there in the property we were at had this private beach on a cove. It was just me and the sea, nothing else, and this fishing pier. So one day I got my meditation on, and this whole flock of seagulls come in from the sky, and they land on the pier, and their little feet are going like this. They're like anxiously going like this. And they like this. They're going like really fast, and they're starting to hear my meditation. And one by one, they slowly calm down, and they lined up in a path, laying down on the pier, totally at peace, listening to my 30-minute meditation. It was the coolest thing to watch them. Like, I just see them. And then the minute the meditation ended, one by one, without being anxious with their feet, one by one, they stood up with this power. And the first one soared, and they all followed and soared. It was like the coolest thing to watch. I just loved it. I was just like, wow, that was so, I'm getting goosebumps because it was just so energizing to watch them. And
I've had so many beautiful experiences like that. And, and I feel like when we're in sync, nature's going to accept us as one and not see us as that dinosaur.
Yeah, it was great. So I'd like to put on the screen now Cheri's bio and how you can reach her. It's got a website and her way to reach out to her, so please take that down. And you'll also have this on the YouTube channel with her bio, so you'll be able to grab onto that. So I so appreciate you coming onto the show today, and what I'd love to share in closing with the audience is to let you know that I do look for other leaders who would love to be on the Connection Show. And so to reach out to me, please go to braveheartworkshops.com, that's workshops with an S, and fill out the contact form, and I'll reach out to you so that we can find a good time for both of us to connect so you could be interviewed on the show. And for you in the audience, we'd love to extend a wonderful invitation to you because we love connection. So we've created the Connection Show Gathering Tribe on Monday nights on Zoom Connect. And to get into that, all you have to do is go on to the Connection Show Gathering Tribe private Facebook page, join that with your email, and then I'll give you access with the Zoom password to come on and connect with us. We meet every Monday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific. So please join us this Monday night on the Connection Show. And I hope that, Cherie, you can come sometime and join us. This past week, we had 4 of our past guest speakers on the show, and it was amazing. We went a little deep last Monday, I have to tell you, with all of the trauma going on in the world these last week. We really just talked about reconciliation and how everything's been affecting each of us. But the week before, we came onto the show and we just felt like we needed to lighten up, so we did improv the whole night, and it was funny. We had belly laughs. So we just kind of let the group lead itself into the direction it needs to. Sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it's light. We play games, but it's really a platform for you to connect with others, so these feelings of isolation and loneliness don't feel so strong. So, Cherie, thanks so very much for joining us in your lovely home and just being a part and sharing your heart with us and your vulnerability.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone. Bye now.
Let's connect now. We can dream together to renew, restore, and reconnect with wellness in our life. Go to braveheartworkshops.com. Join me for weekly Zoom connections on Facebook at facebook.com Braveheart Workshops. Thanks so much for joining the show, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday nights.